Welcome to the Lights Camera Pro podcast, where we interview entertainment pros about their careers and how they became successful in the industry. The secrets to their success here every week. Here's your host, Sean Ventura.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Lights Camera Pro podcast. I'm your host, Sean Ventura, and I just want to say go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and subscribe, rate, and review. I just wanted to mention that this audio podcast was originally a Facebook Live. Our guest today is Russell Nohelty. He's written graphic novels, fantasy novels. He has his own publishing company. He's got a lot of incredible stories if you want to be a writer. He's a great guy. It's going to be fun. Here we go. Okay, hey everybody. This is Sean Ventura with the Lights Camera Pro podcast, and we are live on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and just started a couple days ago on LinkedIn. So welcome. I'm here today with Russell Nohelty, who is a USA Today best-selling author, and he's got tons of books that he's written. He's written graphic novels, he's written fantasy novels, he's written other stuff. He's going to tell us all about it, children's books. How you doing, Russell?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Let's talk about a little bit. I always ask people the question, how did you know you wanted to be an author?
Sure. So I'm not quite sure I ever did want to be an author until it finally came upon me. I started wanting to be a director and then a cinematographer and an editor and then back to being a director. And I directed a web series called Connections along with some shorts that you can watch on YouTube. And then I moved to LA. And my manager introduced me to comics, and I wasn't having a lot of luck in movies and TV. And so I started doing comics, and comics led to novels, and novels led to more novels, and those comics led to more comics. And eventually it just became a thing that I did. And I appreciated the fact that I didn't have to have a lot of people around me in order to make comics or to make movie or to make novels in the way that I did with movies and TV. But yeah, I didn't have this grand plan of wanting to be an author or wanting to be a writer. Like, I wanted to tell stories, and people often ask me, like, how did you know you wanted to be like a creative? Or I just had always known, and no one ever told me that I shouldn't be one or that I wouldn't do it. And I just assumed that the thing you wanted to do when you were a kid was the thing that you did. I didn't realize that now that I'm in my late 30s, every one of my friends who said they wanted to be a writer or director or something, like, none of them are doing that but me. So I just thought, like, I wanted to do a thing, like I wanted to be an actor or a writer or something. And I just kept like pursuing it. And eventually I just kind of became it. But yeah, I really just love telling stories, and authorship is the medium that I can tell stories the easiest because it requires only me. And then once the story is done, I have an editor and a proofreader and cover artist and all these people. But in order to actually tell the story, I don't need anybody but myself.
Right, which is very cool. I've written a bunch of screenplays, a bunch of plays. I've written some children's books. So I'm the guy who is not doing what you're doing. I'm doing the podcast, not finishing writing the books. I have to, I want to get some of them published on Amazon or whatever. But what I want to say to everyone who's out there, hello. Russell has a ton of followers on social media, and Lights Camera Pro has a bunch of followers too. If you have questions for Russell, he is an author of graphic novels, which are very cool. You know who I love? Frank Miller. Have you seen the Frank Miller stuff?
Yeah, Frank Miller did a couple of very great runs in the 80s, plus Sin City, plus, I mean, he's great. He's a little dour for me, but he comes from the same sort of time frame as like a Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore, where like it was quite a bit more verbose on the page than it is now. But yeah, I mean, he's one of the seminal people in graphic novel and in comics.
Right. So who does the illustrations for your graphic novels? Because I don't want to say they're similar, but they're in the same
they have a similar look.
Yeah, well, it's really important to me that we have a similar look across all of our work so that people can point our work out. When forming an audience for comics or for novels, one of the things that you learn very quickly is that, people respond to certain kinds of art or certain kinds of writing styles. And so if you want to continue having success, you kind of have to keep into a more a specific kind of art style, especially with comics. In fact, in comics, people are much more willing to follow you from fantasy to sci-fi and all over the place if you have the art style that they like, as opposed to in novels where more people are following like one specific genre. So the artist for Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter is Renzo Podesta. I met Renzo back in 2010 when we did the first run of Ichabod Jones, the first 4 issues, and we are now working on the second volume. And our artist for Pixie Dust is Nick Torres. Nick Torres is the person who also did our logo. He's worked on Franklin and Ghost. He's worked on a bunch of my anthology projects. He also designed our logo for Wannabe Press. The covers for our anthology series are done by Aaron Alexovich, who draws for Invader Zim and Avatar and all sorts of places. And then for Katrina Hates the Dead, that's our kind of most out there from the rest of our work book, is done by Juan Frigeri, who now is an artist for Marvel. So most of my artists are indie to the core. Juan's the one that sort of actually now works for a major studio.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit? That's very cool. Can you tell us a little bit about Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter? Because it looks very cool, and I'd love to check out the series. What is he hunting? What are the monsters?
Sure. So Ichabod is about a mental patient that escapes from an asylum and becomes a monster hunter during the apocalypse, but he doesn't know if he's killing monsters, humans, or it's all in his head the whole time. I like that. The story is really about whether a person who's objectively evil in the eyes of society can redeem himself. Ichabod has been accused and convicted of killing 4 people, though he's killed many more. He is interned in an asylum, and then when the apocalypse happens, he, because of his penchant for viscera and gore, he is uniquely suited to becoming a hero. And the story is really about whether he can be a hero, and whether the idea that you are a hero because of the things that are broken about you, not despite of them. So it's all of the things that Ichabod has been told are evil about him that end up becoming the things that make him a hero. And the real tragedy of Ichabod is that if the apocalypse is either not true or he fixes it and things go back to normal, then he goes back to being reprehensibly evil in the eyes of society. And yet, even with all of that, he chooses to become a hero anyway and try to save the world.
Very cool. I mean, it sounds to me like it's similar to The Walking Dead. Do you like The Walking Dead series? Because that has a lot of unsavory characters who kind of become heroes.
Yeah, the Walking Dead is the parallel that a lot of people use. I think the difference is that Walking Dead is a hopeless book. Like, there's no hope, there's only survival, and it's about how how the real monsters in the apocalypse are the humans. And Ichabod is about hope. It's about this idea that you can change your destiny, that you have some agency and that things can get better. And the thing is that as the characters traverse this world, they do end up making things better for the world as a whole. And so that is the big difference. Also, one of the things about Ichabod is that it flashes between him being in the apocalypse and in other places. So sometimes it'll just flash and he'll be in his doctor's office before the apocalypse, or he'll be running for his life, or he'll be in sort of a dreamlike state. So there's all these other things that are working on Ichabod. Also, there's tons of other monsters that aren't just zombies. The Walking Dead is zombies, but while there is zombies in Ichabod, there's also slug monsters and demons and sand scorpions and nightmare elves, and it's much more a big fantasy world. There's also a ton of magic. So Necromonica, the first wizard of the apocalypse, can do magic, and there's all these other characters that are magical entities. It's much less based on science fiction than I think Walking Dead is, and much more based in like a big dark fantasy world.
It's very cool, man. So is this just one graphic novel, the Ichabod, and then you're coming out with another graphic novel, or is it one series and you're coming out with another series?
Yeah, so we are currently in the second volume is coming to Kickstarter in September. So it's the continuation of book one. Book two is going to break open the universe, and you're going to see a lot more of the fantasy. We're in production on volume 3, and then if all things go well, we're going to start production in volume 4, hopefully by the end of the year. So I right now have it planned as a four book arc. So it's going to be about 320 pages of art, something around that, through 350 pages of art for this section. And then if this section goes well, I have ways to move it along. But the beauty of Ichabod is that even though he's in the apocalypse, like, it's not necessarily an apocalypse story. It's a story about him and magic and learning to become a hero.
So Kickstarter, explain it to me. You raised, I even wrote this down because it didn't seem right. You raised like $180,000 to write the novels, or to start the publishing company, or for something else. What was the Kickstarter for?
I've run 12 campaigns. We've done everything from a slate of novels to an anthology series to children's book to singular novels. So I started, the first book that we brought to Kickstarter ever was Ichabod Jones, and that was our comic book. And then Katrina Hates the Dead was another comic book. And then I brought My Father Didn't Kill Himself and Sorry for Existing, which are novels, to the platform. We did a children's book called I Can't Stop Tooting a Love Story. Then we did an anthology series called Monsters and Other Scary Shit. We followed that up with Cthulhu Is Hard to Spell. And finally, and then we did Ichabod again. And then we did a slate of books called The Godsverse Chronicles, and then a slate of books called my summer slate. So across 12 different projects, I've raised over $180,000.
Right. But what I'm trying to get is that, so just for one book, just for the Ichabod book, you're saying you go on Kickstarter and say, I'm going to write a graphic novel. Help me raise $10,000 to write the novel, because it's expensive to put together you have to hire artists and publish it and print it, right? Is that what's happening?
You can certainly do that. I don't do it that way. I invest the money beforehand, and then I go to Kickstarter once the book is done. And
you're doing it afterwards. Okay. And is that common for people to ask for graphic novels and to recoup the money and for authors of their novels is that a common thing on Kickstarter?
It's the common way for people who want to get funded, because most people would not just go to Kickstarter and give you money. Right.
So let me ask you about the children's book. I grabbed the second page because I kept grabbing covers, and I just wanted to. I don't know if you can see this if you're watching on Facebook, but is this the book with the birds in it?
That's my book. We didn't do that on Kickstarter. That's a book that I did for a company called Oaklight Publishing. And then I bought the rights back to it a couple of years ago. So I've done 2 children's books, that, and then a book that I did not write or draw called I Can't Stop Tooting a Love Story. And they do different things. So the Can't Stop Tooting a Love Story is a read to book for young children about 0 to 2, and it's about rhyme. This very, very simple rhyme scheme to lull children to sleep. and with bright colors, there's not a lot going on in any panel. So it really draws the eye. Sorry, there is a lot going on in every panel, so it draws the eye around for the kid to be really entertained. For Little Bird and Little Worm, it's a reader book for about 3 to 5 year olds. So the rhyme scheme is a lot more complicated, and the words are more advanced. But because the basic plot repeats 3 times, what we're trying to do is teach children more advanced words, and by repeating it oftentimes in the same page, but many times throughout each step of the story, they're learning things that they normally wouldn't learn in that age range.
Isn't Amazon like 70% of the market, kind of like how Apple is with podcasts? Like, isn't it like the big player in publishing?
Yeah, I think it's more like 80% of the market, maybe even more than that, which is why a lot of people choose KDP Select. I don't like having my books guarded by just one place. I don't like being told I can't be in other places. So all of our books are wide. But yes, that is why a lot of people use KDP Select, because it's basically locking down 80% of the market.
Right. I totally get that. So let's talk about your publishing company. How did that come about? What got you into publishing? Was it a necessity because you were making these books? How did it happen?
Yeah, so I had a couple of publishing deals, and I was not happy with how the publishing deals were working. So I deadlines were missed. Like, I wasn't making a lot of profit or any money at all. So I pulled back all of the rights and chose to do it all myself, figuring that I don't know if I can be a good publisher, but I can at least be a sucky one. So I went to Kickstarter with my book Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter in 2014. And the leftover after we paid for the printing was just enough to make Wannabe Press a company, really make Wannabe Press a thing. And so we incorporated, and that became Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter, and the 2 books that I had bought back from other printers. Our publishers became our first slate of books when we started in 2015. So the books started. The onus of the company was in 2014, but then 2015 is when we released our first slate of books, which was The Little Bird and Little Worm, Gumshoe's The Case of Madison's Father, and then Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter.
Very cool. And are you looking for books to be part of your publishing company, or you have enough work and enough books?
God, no. I hate publishing other people's works.
It's just for you. Okay. And as far as promotion, you're talking about some of these authors don't want to promote. Promotion's such a huge part of it. What would you say the Comic-Cons and the WonderCons, because I'm bringing up a couple pictures here of you at different conventions. Would you say it's a huge part of it, a tiny part of it? Social media is bigger than going to the cons, or how significant is it going to conferences?
Conventions are about 50%. We're about 50% of our income. So we would make half of our sales for Wannabe Press at conventions, and the other half on Kickstarter. So basically, either Kickstarter or conventions, between those two, made up about 95% of all of our income for Wannabe Press. Very little comes from bookstore sales or website sales or like Amazon sales. Almost everything comes from selling either at shows or on Kickstarter. And because of your books, they're fantasy books and graphic novels, but even the graphic novels have a fantasy element, correct? Yes. Would you categorize yourself as a fantasy writer? And do they do better at fantasy conferences versus superhero conference, like Comic-Cons or what? They do pretty well. I mean, I'm a pretty successful person when it comes to any kind of convention. But yeah, I mean, I definitely consider myself a fantasy author. I use horror elements in a lot of my books. So you'll see demons and demonology and but like they're not done in the traditional horror scare sense. They're done in the mythological sense, and specifically inside fantasy. I'm a mythological fantasy author, so I deal with mythology, fairy tales, and sort of bring them and modernizing them and putting them into the past, the present. But like I use tons of mythological and fairy tale elements in my books. The kinds of conventions that work well for us are horror conventions, book conventions, and comic conventions, and anime conventions, depending on the anime convention. We don't do well at like state fairs or like Renaissance, like any of that stuff. Like those are the four things. And some of them are about this size, something like Silicon Valley Comic Con, will be 50,000 people, whereas something like WorldCon, I think, was about 8,000 people, and we sold about the same at both. So at a good book convention, I will sell way more than anywhere else as far as on a per person basis, but it depends on the book convention. But it really, a lot of the comic conventions are so big because they're so big. Like there's just so many people to potentially sell to. They all come to these shows, and they're really like 50 shows in one. Like San Diego Comic-Con has the small press area, it has the artist alley area, it has the big like Marvel and area, it's got the panel area, so like everybody can have their like little convention inside of their big convention. So it's been pretty hard because we've been trying to figure out how to replace that amount of income that we get from shows with other things. But yeah, it's been a huge part of our business. And I think being out there and meeting the fans face to face and like putting a face to the name, because like on Amazon, you don't get to meet them. Like you don't even know their names. You just know that you made a sale, and it could be from anywhere in America. It could be a person you've met. It could be a person you've never met. You have no idea. On Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or website, at least you get an email address, and you can cross-reference that with, your current email list and see if that person is on your email list already. And if they're not, you can at least make a connection with them. But at shows, like you're literally talking to somebody in person, and like they're holding your book in their hand. So it's a much deeper connection, much more quickly than you get anywhere else. But they're very hard. Like they're brutally hard. They're 4 or 5 days, getting up at 6 a.m, going to bed at midnight, like on your feet the whole day, talking to thousands of people. It's backbreaking work. I mean, people don't think of like authorship as like backbreaking work, but yeah, I mean, oftentimes I will go back. I'll do like 8 conventions back to back, with the only break being me flying home or driving home, picking up books and going back out. And, the boxes are 30 pounds. I carry 10 or 12 of them at a convention, plus like any restocks. So it's and then you're literally on your feet from the moment the convention starts, the moment it closes. And like maybe you get a chance to shovel food in your mouth before you go back, or like do whatever the end day stuff is, like the networking or the meetings or any of those other things. So while it's super fun, it's also backbreaking work. It's also like very laborious and exhausting work. Not having those shows allows me to write way more and like be able to still make a fan base and be on more shows like this one and just be more present online. But it takes away that in-person relationship that you build with somebody, meeting them again and again and again from show to show to show.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask you. I was an actor for years, and sometimes you come out after the play and meet the audience. Do you have that connection when they just come up and buy a book from you, or is it more when you are at the I forget what they call it, where you're at the table there talking, like a talk about fantasy books or whatever with a bunch of people? Do you get more of a connection there where you get to talk a little bit more and you're not just, okay, I got to get the next person.
Yeah. I think I make the best connection at my table when I'm seeing them one-on-one. I mean, it's always great to have a room full of 100 people, but you don't really get that the connection. Sometimes the best connection oftentimes is there's people that wait for you after the panel to walk back to your table, and those people will ask you questions, and you end up getting like a really nice connection with those people. But you can't look out into a crowd of people and like pick one person out usually of like who you're going to have a connection with. Where the people that come to your table, you're basically talking to them for 3 to 5 minutes, uninterrupted usually. Sometimes you do it in a big group, but oftentimes it's like you're one-on-one with these people for a few minutes. And that's where the connection, I think that's where the connection like really grows. Then you can see them at conventions, or you can see them online, or you can see them at your table, at like another person's table. You can see them at a store signing. But I think it all starts with being one-on-one with them at your table.
So let's talk about Godverse. I'm just putting up the book, and Death Followed Behind Her on the screen. So just something I grabbed out of your press kit. Can you talk about maybe this book and just the Godverse series in general?
Sure. So the Godsverse is my mythological fantasy universe. It takes place over 13,000 years, going all the way back to the time of Pixie Dust in Octa's time, who's the sort of first chronological graphic novel and then book in the universe, all the way through 10,000 years past the time of the Katrina, who's the other main heroine in the series. So the Godsverse is sort of what if all gods were real? They were just kind of dicks. It's based on our two most popular graphic novels, Katrina Hates the Dead and Pixie Dust. So they anchor the series. I novelized both Pixie Dust and Katrina Hates the Dead. And Katrina Hates the Dead is the first book in And Death Followed Behind Her, which is the first book in the series. Okay. So Katrina is sort of the titular character. She's the sort of thing the whole universe revolves around. And the first graphic novel that I had made in the Godsverse. And it's about a woman who gets sick of living during the apocalypse. She sets out to hell to kill the devil. And then in the second book, she sets out to kill the Greek gods. And the third book, the Titans. And then there's the second book, and Doom Followed Behind Her, is about another different character named Rebecca Lobdell, who was a minor character in the second and third Katrina books, who joins an intergalactic organization called the Gods Church that protects gods, while a group called the Godless are struggling to like hunt them down, basically, and kill them all. So it's kind of like a big exploration of like religion and gods and philosophy, but in this fast-paced fantasy thriller way. And then in the third book, and Hell Followed Behind Her, we go all the way back to Pixie Dust and the time of Octa. And we tell 3 stories during Octa's time. Then the fourth book and Ruin Followed Behind Her are set in the years right before the apocalypse in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where we follow one of Octa's descendants as she learns how to deal with her new pixie powers, basically, and start becoming like protecting pixies, and Octa plays a big part in the third and fourth book, and Katrina in the first and second book. And then I've written the fifth book and sixth book, which are team up books, which have all of the main characters that people love about the Godsverse in their own like sort of stories together, sort of like in our Avengers style team up books. So yeah, it's all like mythology. Greek, Roman, Judeo-Christian are the main ones. And then there's Norse, also an Egyptian, Indian, a Hindu, and like others that like sort of pop up. But the main ones are Greek, Roman, Judeo-Christian, and then Norse, and then Egyptian. So, but it's my theory as to how we went from polytheism to monotheism, and how all gods from all pantheons are real.
Very cool. It sounds fun, man. It sounds like a fun series. It's sounds like there's a lot of stuff going on there with all the different gods and the Avenger style meetups. And so let me ask you this. Who is your favorite author? And I know you have like 15 or 50, but if you could just focus on one, it could be a graphic novelist, or it could be someone who writes fantasy novels, whatever you want to say. Who do you love to read when in your downtime?
I am going to bring it to somebody who I enjoy reading, which people will actually recognize, because there's a lot of very obscure people that I really love reading. But I really love Terry Pratchett's work in the Discworld and how it connects everything together, and how he's able to move from epic fantasy to urban fantasy to across decades, centuries, eons of his timeline, and just tell any story that he wants and just say, this was a Discworld book. And why is it? Because I said so, because it happens on Discworld. And so anything, like he does underworld stories and good stories about gods, and like tiny stories and stories about like death becoming Santa Claus, and it's just all over the map. But people follow him, and like I hope someday to have a readership that is as devoted to his work, that is as devoted to my book, and will follow me across like any weird story I want to tell, as he has. I also really love Good Omens. It's one of my favorite books of all time that he wrote with Neil Gaiman, and I think that they very well counterbalance each other. So there's some things that Terry Pratchett does that I don't love, and some things that Neil Gaiman does that I don't love, and like they kind of smooth out each other's faults and like strengthen each other's strengths. So I think that for someone who's like, where do we even start with Terry Pratchett? I think Good Omens is a good one, and that will give you a sort of branch out to both Neil Gaiman, who's wonderful, and Terry Pratchett, who is wonderful.
Very cool. And have you seen the series of the Good Omens?
I did. It's very faithful to the book adaptation, which it should be, because like
I like those two actors. Those two actors are great.
Yeah. Well, and Neil Gaiman directed it, or like show ran it, so like it should be. Yeah. So I mean, he was very much. He was very faithful, and I was very appreciative. But yeah, that's a wonderful series.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out, because I've seen some of the episodes, but I haven't read the book. Okay, we're going to do a couple more things because it's 2:47. We're just going to go to your advice for young authors or people who are getting into it when they're 40. And then we're going to wrap it up where people can find your books and what website and all that good stuff. So if you could just start with advice for young people or people switching careers.
Sure. I mean, the best advice for anybody who is just starting out is you suck at writing. You're a very bad writer. Your taste is very good, but your actual ability to write is very bad. And it is best to understand that now so that you can work to improve it. So the way you improve that is through practice, and through specifically focused intentional practice. So finishing stories, writing stories, and then doing it again and again and again. And every time you finish something, you're going to learn a little bit more, and you're going to learn sort of what your voice is. And the voice is the thing that usually comes in last of all of this stuff. So structure, character, dialogue, pacing, all of these things are critically important. But the thing that is going to like set you apart is the voice that you have and the thing that you want to say. And you really only have a voice when you've written a lot, and you can look back and say, these are the themes I keep coming back to. These are the stories that I like telling. Like these are the worlds that I like living in. And we spend so much time talking about like, well, I'm going to have this huge fan base. I'm going to have this huge this and that and the other thing. And like when it makes so much money, but all of that comes from you having a voice that people want to read. And the voice comes from A, lived experience, and B, writing a lot and reading a lot. And that's the other thing, is that if you're not reading a lot, you're never going to be a great writer. You might be a good writer, you might be a serviceable writer, but like writing is breathing out and reading is breathing in, or at least consuming media is breathing in. So like maybe it's not writing, like reading books, but at least reading screenplays or watching movies, watching games, and like critically evaluating what is good and what is bad about them. And it sucks because it like ruins movies for you for like a long time. And like it ruins media for you for a long time.
I know what
the
you're
good
saying,
news is I can tell you from doing this for decades now that like if you critically evaluate it enough and like you learn enough from it, eventually that joy does come back and you're able to enjoy movies and read books again and just like with your mind turned off. I've talked to tons of people who are creatives, successful creatives, and they all had this period of like they couldn't enjoy the work that they loved. But then because they were analyzing it, but they all came through the other side and like they ended up being able to now go back and appreciate those things again on the other side of it. So those are the main things. If you're just starting out, you're not going to be successful right away. You shouldn't even really put your first works up to be sold right away. You should have a safe space to fail. And then once you have know what you want to say and you're making that really great stuff, that is when something like the Complete Creative or doing courses or doing other stuff can like really be helpful. But it's not going to help you supercharge your career if you like don't already have a basis for the kinds of stuff you want to make.
Right. It's great advice, man. I definitely know that that feeling of going to a movie and just analyzing it rather than enjoying it, and it takes time. And there have been several series. I don't know if you had this experience, like The Walking Dead and some other series where I'm just in it. You know what I mean? I'm not thinking about the cinematography. I'm not thinking about the writing. I'm not thinking about the acting. Oh, that was a really bad continuity or anything like that. It's just, wow, I'm in this thing and I'm going along for the ride. At least the first couple seasons. After that, I don't know. But can you tell everybody, Russell, where they can find your books and maybe even where we're not doing conventions now, but in the future, where they can find you?
Well, at russellnohelty.com, you can join my mailing list. I send out a weekly email to tell you what any upcoming events are. You can see all of my books on there. If you are a creative kind of human yourself and you want to see my musings from 10, 15 years of being a creative, you can go to thecompletecreative.com. But yeah, russellnohelty.com will show you where all of our awesome books are. And when I launch projects and things like that, I send out it in my newsletter first.
Very cool. And I went to your YouTube channel and you had a bunch of podcasts on there. Is that what you're talking about? The Complete Creative is a podcast?
The Complete Creative is a podcast, but it's so much more. I have over 400 blog posts about how to live a creative life.
Okay.
It's broken up into 3 sections: mindset, creativity, and then sales. And it's meant to sort of help creatives learn how to sort of just be more creative and lead a more creative and successful life. So thecompletecreative.com does have the archives for my podcast, The Complete Creative, where I interview creators about how they build and sustain their creative career. We have had a lot of amazing creators on. We have had it's become sort of like a conversational platform to have these deep, meaningful conversations with people that I really respect and who are doing interesting work and oftentimes very successful work as well. But the Complete Creative, the podcast is one part of it, but the actual archives have all sorts of everything from how to build your audience, how to succeed on Kickstarter. They've got free courses, paid courses, it's like a whole treasure trove of information depending on how you like to consume media.
Very cool. I'm definitely going to check it out. Well, this has been great, Russell. Thank you so much for doing this. Man, you are just prolific. You just write. I mean, do you sleep?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing that I try and tell people is I do this all in about 5 hours a day of like work.
Oh, really?
And then I recover. So I have a pretty strict schedule. From 6 to 9, I do like admin work. From 9 to 2, I do creative work. From 2 to 5, I recover. And then from 5 to 7, I do admin work again. So that's my and I don't always do all of that admin work. I usually just read a book in the afternoon. So yeah, I think you can be very creative and be very prolific and write 10 books a year, do all the other stuff plus podcasting and all that. Like I do it all pretty focused in about 5 to 8 hours a day.
Wow. That's fantastic, man. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It's been great talking to you. I'm sure everybody has enjoyed it and will enjoy it when they watch it on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And when I make this into a podcast, you said that I'm trying to make your window of September 1st to September 21st, because that's when Ichabod Jones Volume 2 comes out, correct?
That's correct. It starts, Ichabod Jones is going to be on Kickstarter September 1st.
All right. Thank you, man.
Awesome,
Bye-bye.
man. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Lights Camera Pro podcast, where entertainment pros talk about how they made their dream into a career.
Go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and subscribe, rate, and review. Thanks to Bob Juergens for the Rockin' VO and Joseph McDade for the music. Next week, we've got some special guests from Liverpool. It's some guys with a camera. They've made 12 short films so far, won some awards already. Very interesting guys. It's going to be fun. Check it out next week.